The north was colder than ever, and Robb Stark could feel it in his bones, not just the weather, but the feeling that something was wrong. He sat in his war tent, staring at the map of Westeros, candles flickering in the dim light. Catelyn Stark, his mother, stood close, her eyes tired but sharp. "Walder Frey is a snake," she said again, her voice calm but firm. "Your father never trusted him. I don't see why you should either." Robb sighed. "I need his men. The twins guard the river. We can't take Casterly Rock without crossing." "But if you cross under his roof," she warned, "you'll be under his mercy." Just then, Jon Snow entered the tent. He had returned from the wall under secret leave, called upon by a raven from his brother. Now wearing black and grey instead of full Night's Watch black, Jon looked like a true Stark. His face was pale from the cold, but his eyes burned with purpose. "You can't trust a man who sells daughters like pigs," Jon said bluntly. "Frey will never forgive you for marrying Talisa." Robb stared at his half-brother. The weight of command had aged him beyond his 20 years. But Jon spoke the truth. The insult to Walder Frey was deep, and men like Frey didn't forget. They waited, and they struck in silence, so Robb made a choice. "We won't go through the twins," he declared. "We'll find another way." But one of his lords started to argue. "I said no. We'll march north, cross the river where it's not guarded. We'll lose time, but we'll keep our heads." It was a hard decision. They had less food, less shelter, and the weather was turning cruel. But it was better than walking into a trap with smiles on their faces. Word reached Walder Frey quickly. The old lord was furious. "He dares insult me twice," he spat. "First he breaks a promise to marry my daughter, now he refuses my hall." But this time there was no red wedding, no music, no blood in the hall. Frey sent messages to Tywin Lannister, whining about betrayal, but the Lannisters were already losing grip. Without the red wedding, they had no clear way to crush Robb's army. Meanwhile, Robb's forces marched through cold forests and across frozen rivers, suffering but alive. They avoided the twins and circled back, finding unlikely support in the Riverlands, where many hated the Lannisters more than they feared the Freys. Jon stayed with Robb, a silent shadow at his side. The men respected him, not as a Lord Commander, not yet, but as a Stark of the North. He gave them fire when they were cold and steel when they doubted. In quiet moments, Robb and Jon would talk like brothers again. "You ever think about father?" Robb once asked, as they sat near a stream, sharpening swords. "Every night," Jon said. "He wouldn't have walked into the twins. He would have seen it." "Aye," Robb nodded. "Maybe I've made too many mistakes already." Jon looked at him. "It's not too late to fix them." That night, Robb sent a raven to the Vale, to Lady Arryn. "If I'm to win this war," he told Jon, "I need more than swords." "I need alliances," Jon nodded. "Smart. The Lannisters play with gold. We'll play with loyalty." But in King's Landing, the Lannisters were not sitting quietly. Tywin Lannister was angry. He had planned for the Red Wedding to end the war cleanly. Now he had to think again. "He's avoiding traps," Tywin muttered. "He's learning. That makes him dangerous." Cersei sipped her wine. "Then maybe it's time we stop playing fair." Back in the north, something else stirred. Word came from Castle Black. Things were getting worse beyond the wall. Jon's time with Robb was short. The brothers knew it. "I'll stay till you're at Casterly Rock's gates," Jon promised. "Then I must return. There's a greater war coming." Robb looked at him. "I believe you." And for the first time in many moons, the north looked like it might rise again, not broken by betrayal, but stronger by wisdom. The cold didn't care for kings. It bit just as hard on Robb Stark's neck as it did the lowest foot soldier in his camp. But Robb wasn't thinking of the cold. He was thinking of Lisa Arryn, and the raven she hadn't yet answered. Days had passed since he sent his message to the Eyrie. If she agreed to send men, they could march south with double strength and strike a blow to Tywin Lannister's pride. But Lady Arryn had always been unpredictable. Some said she was mad. Some said worse. Catelyn was pacing by the fire when the raven finally came. "She says she'll speak," the Maester said, handing over the scroll. Robb unrolled it quickly, eyes scanning each line. His jaw tightened. "She wants me to come to the Eyrie, alone, without my army." Catelyn frowned. "She's playing games." "You're not a puppet." Jon leaned on the table. "Or she's afraid. The Vale hasn't seen war since Robert died. She might want to look you in the eye before she picks a side." Robb clenched the message in his fist. "Then I'll go. Jon, you'll ride with me. We'll take a small guard, no more." The journey to the Eyrie took 4 days, through narrow valleys and icy passes. The sky grew pale with snow as they climbed higher. At the bloody gate, they were searched, questioned, then finally allowed in. Lysa Arryn sat on her high seat, her young son clinging to her side like a baby bird. She looked at Robb with cold eyes, not sisterly but suspicious. "You bring war to my doorstep, nephew," she said. "I bring truth," Robb replied. "The Lannisters killed my father. They murdered my bannerman. I seek justice, not chaos." She tilted her head. "Justice can be expensive, and I have a child to protect." Jon, standing beside Robb, finally spoke. "If the Lannisters win, do you really think they'll leave the Vale untouched? Your son won't grow up a lord. He'll grow up a hostage, or not grow up at all." Lysa narrowed her eyes. "And who are you to speak so boldly?" "Jon Snow, Ned Stark's blood, even if not his name. And I've seen the future coming. If we don't stand together, we fall, one by one." The room was silent for a long while. Lysa looked at her son, who was playing with a toy falcon. "Very well," she said at last. "I'll send 5,000 men under yon Royce. But if I lose even one of them because of your foolish war—" "It's not foolish," Robb interrupted, eyes locked on hers. "It's necessary." With the Vale behind them, Robb's power grew. Now he had numbers to match Tywin's gold, and for the first time in months his council felt hopeful. But war doesn't wait for hope. As Robb rode back from the Eyrie, a raven came with black news. Winterfell was burning. The Boltons had betrayed him. Rose Bolton, who had sworn loyalty to Robb, had turned cloak. While Robb had avoided the Frey's knife, he hadn't seen the blade hidden in the north. Ramsay Snow, Bolton's bastard, had taken Winterfell in a surprise assault. The castle was in ruins. Bran and Rickon were missing, possibly dead. Robb read the message in silence, his knuckles turned white. "They're killing us from inside," Jon said, fury flashing in his eyes. "First Theon, now the Boltons. You can't win a war if your own lords are snakes." Robb looked up, face hard as steel. "We end this. We end it now. No more mercy, no more trust." When they reached the army again, Robb called his commanders to a war council. "We ride north first," he said. "We take back Winterfell. We burn the Dreadfort if we must, and then we ride for the Rock. But the Rock is strong," one of the bannermen protested. "It's never been taken." Robb smiled bitterly. "Good. Then the Lannisters won't expect us to try." He turned to Jon. "Ride to the Night's Watch. Tell them I'll send men once I reclaim the north. But if what you said is true, about what's coming beyond the wall, then I'll need you alive, Jon. I'll need you to fight that war while I fight mine." Jon hesitated. "And if I choose to stay with you?" "Then the wall may fall," Robb said quietly, "and we'll all lose, every last one of us." They embraced, brothers one last time. The snow fell heavy that night, as if the gods themselves were watching. But neither man bent, neither wolf bowed. And far in the west, behind golden walls, Tywin Lannister realized his trap had failed. The war had changed, and the north was far from dead. Snow covered the north like a burial cloth. The sky was white, the trees pale, and the winds whispered of ghosts. But Robb Stark wasn't afraid of ghosts, not anymore. He was riding with 10,000 men behind him, the banners of House Stark and House Manderley flying in the wind, and his sword hand aching for justice. Winterfell was still smoking, When Robb and his army arrived, they found the once proud castle half destroyed. The walls were black with soot, and the towers looked like broken teeth. Bodies of the loyal lay in the snow, and the gates hung crooked. But worst of all, there was no sign of Bran or Rickon. Robb stood in the courtyard, his face pale with rage. "Where are my brothers?" he growled. A captured Bolton soldier knelt before him, trembling in the snow. I don't know, my lord. The bastard, Ramsay, he took them, or maybe they escaped, I swear." Robb drew his sword and ended him mid-sentence. The man's blood steamed in the snow. "There will be no mercy for traitors," Robb said loudly. "No more chances. No more blind trust." Behind him, Lord Wyman Manderley nodded grimly. "House Bolton will pay." The North remembers. As the army camped in the ruins, a raven came from the Dreadfort, a mocking letter from Ramsay Snow himself. "To the king who lost his home, your brothers ran like rats if they live at all. Winterfell belongs to the New North. Come and take it if you dare." Signed, Ramsay Snow, Warden in Training. Robb crumpled the letter in his fist. He didn't say a word, but the fire in his eyes said everything. They rode for the Dreadfort in 3 days, crossing frozen rivers and snow-choked roads. On the 4th night they made camp just a league away. Jon Snow had left for the Wall as planned, but his absence left a hole in Robb's side. He missed his brother, his shadow, his voice of caution. That night Robb couldn't sleep. He walked alone outside his tent, snow crunching under his boots, memories swirling in his head. His father's voice, Bran climbing, Rickon's laughter, Talisa's smile, everything he'd lost because of this cursed war. The next morning he stood before his men. "Today we reclaim what was stolen. The Boltons betrayed the North. They wore our colors and stabbed us in the back. No one forgets the traitor's face. No one forgets the wolf they tried to cage. The Dreadfort stood strong, but not strong enough." Robb's scouts had found a hidden path through the woods, an old hunter's trail once used by wildlings. He used it. The battle came at dawn. They struck fast. Catapults shattered the walls, while archers rained death from the tree line. Ramsay's men fought like devils, cruel and desperate, but the Starks fought with fury. They had come not for honor, but for vengeance. Robb led the charge through the gates, grey wind snarling beside him, tearing through men like paper. The northern soldiers followed, their swords singing the old songs of ice and justice. Inside the great hall, Robb found Roose Bolton. The old traitor stood calm, blade drawn, blood splattered across his armor. "Ramsay was nowhere to be seen, King Robb," Roose said with a sneer. "The boy king finally comes home. You murdered my bannerman. You let your bastard burn my home," Robb growled, sword raised. "I did what I had to," Roose said coldly. "You were losing. Aligning with the Lannisters was survival. You should have bent the knee." Robb didn't respond with words. Their swords clashed like thunder. Roose was faster than he looked, but Robb fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. Their blades rang through the hall, knocking over tables and torches. In the end, Robb knocked Roose to his knees and drove his sword through his heart. The war horns outside stopped. The Dreadfort was theirs, but Ramsay was gone. "He escaped through the kennels," one of the soldiers reported. "Took 10 men, maybe more." Robb clenched his fists. "Let him run. He'll find no home in the North again." That night, they burned the Bolton banners. Wolves replaced flayed men, and the North rejoiced, for the traitors had fallen. But the victory was bittersweet. Bran and Rickon were still missing, possibly dead. Robb stood alone on the battlements of the Dreadfort, looking toward the cold horizon. "Every win costs something," he whispered, and in the far distance, at the wall, Jon Snow reached Castle Black, only to find it half empty. Its gates shattered. Something dark had come from beyond the trees. The wall was not supposed to fall. But when Jon Snow arrived at Castle Black, all he found was ruin. The great gates lay splintered, blackened by fire. Smoke still lingered in the sky, hanging over the shattered towers like a mourning veil. Dead crows lay frozen in the snow, limbs twisted in fear. There was no warning, no horns, no signs of a battle won or lost, only silence. Ghost walked beside him, sniffing the air, growling low. "Easy, boy," Jon whispered, though his heart was hammering in his chest. "Stay sharp. Inside the courtyard, the snow was painted red. Something terrible had happened. Something more than wildlings or traitors. John found Meister Eamon's chair overturned, and beside it, the bloody hand of a man who had tried to crawl away. John bent down and saw a single black feather. "White walkers," he muttered. He had seen the signs before. The silence, the fear frozen onto faces. But this wasn't some remote village. This was the wall. This was the Night's Watch, and they had fallen. In the mess hall, he finally found survivors, 3 men, wounded and frostbitten, hiding in the cellar under barrels of dried beans. They shook when they saw him, like ghosts seeing a ghost. "They came through the woods," one of them said, voice cracked and dry. "Not many, just a dozen, but they didn't die. You stabbed them, they kept coming. John sat them down, fed them, gave them water." He listened carefully, but the answer in his gut was already clear. The wall wasn't just broken. It was meaningless now. The White Walkers were moving. Slowly, yes, but deliberately. And the realm still fought over thrones while death walked behind trees. John knew what he had to do. In the Dreadfort, Robb Stark sat with Maester Wyman, reading scrolls that came from scattered villages and keeps. Wildling sightings, increasing beyond the last river. 2 watchposts burned. "No survivors?" Robb tapped the table. "This is John's war," Wyman nodded. "But it may become yours too if you don't move fast." Catelyn entered, her cloak wet from snow, face pale. "Robb, another raven. This one from White Harbour." Wyman Manderley's youngest son saw shadows in the water. Dead men with blue eyes, walking. Robb rubbed his face. "The Boltons were supposed to be the worst. The Freys, the Lannisters, but this is something else." "Then send word to John," Catelyn said. "Ask him what's coming." "I don't have to," Robb replied quietly. "I already know." Far away, Ramsay Snow knelt in a ruined house in the woods. His face was streaked with ash, a wolf bite fresh on his shoulder, and his eyes glinted with madness. He'd watched his father die, watched Robb Stark take everything. But he wasn't done yet. "They'll forget I'm alive," he whispered to himself. "They'll forget the bastard." Behind him, 10 loyal killers waited, each crueler than the last. Flayed men, mad dogs, broken lords with nothing left to lose. "We ride for the twins," Ramsay said, grinning like a beast. "Time to remind the Freys who the real monsters are." Back at Castle Black, John climbed to the top of the broken wall, where the wind screamed like banshees. He lit a torch and raised it high, waving it 3 times toward the trees. A moment later, movement in the forest, then more. One by one, wildlings began to appear, Tormund Giantsbane among them, leading the survivors of Hardhome. "You called us," Tormund said, voice rough. "We came, but we ain't fighting for no crown," John nodded. "We're not fighting for crowns anymore. We're fighting to stay alive," Tormund chuckled. "Aye, and here I thought war was over." They stood together looking out over the snow. "What's the plan, Crow?" John stared into the darkness. "We go to Winterfell. We join Robb, and we tell every lord and every farmer what's coming. You think they'll believe us?" "They will," John said, "when they see the dead walk." Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister was aging faster than the crown on his table. Robb Stark was alive. The North was rising, and now strange rumors of walking corpses were spreading like wildfire. He summoned Cersei and Jaime to his chambers. "If the North is united again," he said slowly, "we face more than rebellion. We face extinction." Jaime laughed bitterly. "What, because some peasant thinks he saw a ghost in the snow?" Tywin didn't laugh. "Winter is here, and it won't bow to lions." That night, Robb dreamed of wolves howling beneath a blood-red moon, and somewhere in the far, frozen north, something opened its eyes, blue, icy, endless, and it remembered the name Stark. Snow fell like ash across the north, covering the Dreadfort's towers and walls in soft silence. But peace was nowhere to be found. Robb stood in the great hall, sharpening his sword. Not ice, his father's great sword was long gone, but still, steel enough to cut through lies and flesh alike. His hand paused as the doors opened behind him. Jon Snow entered. He was cloaked in black furs, taller than before, harder somehow. Ghost padded silently behind him, crimson eyes glowing in the torchlight. And behind Jon, wildlings, dozens of them, hard-eyed men and women with frostbitten hands and weapons made of bone and steel. Robb dropped the whetstone and walked toward his brother. They didn't say anything at first. Just stood face to face, then Robb pulled Jon into a fierce hug. "You came back," Robb said, voice low. "I had to," Jon replied. "Because what's coming?" "Robb, it's not a war. It's an ending." Robb's expression darkened. "Tell me everything." Jon did. He told him about the fall of Castle Black, the dead things walking, the White Walkers who couldn't be killed by ordinary blades, about Hardhome and the Night King, and how fire barely slowed them. How even the bravest men screamed when they saw their own brothers rise against them. Catelyn listened from the shadows, hand over her mouth. "They're building an army, Robb," Jon said. "And it's not just in the north anymore. They're heading south, slowly but surely. They want us all." Robb sat down heavily. "And the lords?" he asked. "Will they believe this?" "They'll believe when they see," Jon replied. "But by then it may be too late." There was a long silence in the hall. Then Robb stood again. "Then we don't wait. We ride to Winterfell. We gather every house, big or small. Glover, Reed, Mormont, even the damned Karstarks if they'll listen. And the South?" Jon asked. Robb looked away. The South still too busy stabbing itself. But not everyone in the South was blind. Tyrion Lannister had received word. Quiet ravens from old friends in the North. The dead were real. The wall was broken. And the North was rising under a king who had survived betrayal and war. Robb Stark. Tyrion sipped his wine and stared out the window of the Tower of the Hand. He wasn't sure whether he admired the boy or feared him. Cersei didn't. Believed the rumors, of course. She called them northern ghost stories, drunk off her own lies. Jaime didn't know what to think. And Tywin was already preparing defenses at Harrenhal just in case, but Tyrion knew this wasn't just politics anymore. At Winterfell, Robb stood again beneath the heart tree in the Godswood. The snows had been cleared, but blood still stained the bark from old battles. Jon stood beside him, and behind them, wildlings, Manderleys, Umbers, and even a few cautious lords from the Vale. "We must do more than remember the North," Robb said. "We must unite it. We can't afford old grudges." "Not now." Tormund Giantsbane stepped forward, voice booming. "We fight for the living," he said. "But if you treat us like dogs, we'll run back to the woods and leave you to the dead." Robb looked him in the eye. "You're not dogs. You're men. And today, you're Northmen." There was a murmur in the crowd, doubt, suspicion, and then something else, respect. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. They lit great fires that night. Signal fires! One by one they were lit on towers, hills, and keeps across the north. A message: unite or die. Some houses answered. Others stayed silent, waiting to see who lived. But the message had been sent. The king in the north was not dead, and neither was hope. But far to the west, in the ruins of the twins, another fire burned. Walder Frey stood trembling as Ramsay Snow dragged his blade across the throat of his third son. "Your house betrayed the North," Ramsay whispered in Walder's ear. "Now you'll see what betrayal gets you." Frey begged, cried, offered gold. It didn't matter. That night, House Frey fell, not by sword, but by flame. Ramsay set fire to the twins, leaving only a few bodies nailed to the gate as a message: the bastard lives. At Winterfell, Jon Snow couldn't sleep. He stood on the battlements, eyes watching the tree line. Ghost growled low, and then he saw it, far on the horizon. Not wolves, not men, shadows marching. The snow whispered as they came. The dead were here. The horns blew just before dawn, not once. Not twice, 3 times. Every man in the north knew what it meant. The dead were at the gates. Robb Stark stood in full armor atop the battlements of Winterfell, snow swirling around him like spirits of the past. His face was calm, but his eyes burned. Around him stood his mother, Catelyn, grey-faced and silent, and Lord Manderley, already shouting orders to his men. Jon Snow was already at the front lines, sword drawn. His breath fogged the air as he stood among wildlings, Night's Watch deserters, and Northmen alike, men who only a year ago might have killed each other on sight. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder, weapons in trembling hands, waiting. Then the sky grew darker. A chill rolled in, colder than winter had any right to be. The fires flickered, torches dimmed, horses reared. And then they came, thousands of them, dead men, blue-eyed, silent, walking across the snow like shadows given bones. Former Night's Watch brothers, wildlings, soldiers, children, all dead, all marching, and behind them atop a pale horse, a white walker rode with a spear of ice gripped tightly in his long fingers. He did not speak. He only pointed. Winterfell was surrounded. Tormund Giantsbane roared a curse. "We hold them at the walls. You let them past, we're feeding babies to ghosts." The first wave hit like a storm. They clawed at the walls, climbed, flung themselves onto spikes without care. Robb's archers fired endlessly, and still they came. Jon fought at the gate, slicing through the undead with Longclaw, Valyrian steel cutting through them like butter. But for every one he dropped, 3 more rose, ghosts tore through the bodies. Red eyes blazing, but even he looked shaken. Inside the castle, Gilly and old Nan, huddled with women and children in the crypts, praying to gods they barely remembered. Catelyn stood guard outside the great hall, sword in hand. No longer a lady of nobility, but a Stark of the North, ready to die. As the battle raged, Robb shouted orders from the towers. But he knew this wasn't a battle they could win with strategy. This wasn't about terrain or numbers. It was about time. How long until the sun rises? He shouted to Maester Vyman. "Too long," the Maester replied. Then a scream. From the east wall, they had broken through. Robb mounted his horse without a word and rode straight into the chaos. He met Jon there, surrounded back-to-back with wildlings and Manderly men. Their blades slick with ice and blood. "We're being overrun," Jon shouted, hacking down another corpse. Robb's face was grim. "Then we fall like wolves. Not rats." A sudden gust of wind silenced everything, and from the mist he came, the Night King. He walked alone now, slow and sure. His eyes locked on Robb like a predator watching prey. Everything else faded. Jon turned. "It's him," Robb dismounted. "I have to face him." "No," Jon snapped. "You don't. He's not just a man, Robb. He's death." "I am the king in the north," Robb said softly. "If I die running, then I was never a king at all." He stepped forward. The Night King raised his icy blade. They clashed. Robb's sword met the frozen steel in a scream of metal and frost. The Night King moved faster than expected, and Robb barely blocked the second blow. He fought with the strength of 10 men, but it wasn't enough. The Night King struck again, sending Robb sprawling into the snow. Just as the Night King raised his blade to end him, Jon dove forward. Longclaw met the ice blade with a thunderous crack, and sparks flew. Jon fought like a demon, driving the Night King back. Every strike was desperation, fury, and survival. The Night King was faster, stronger, but Jon was stubborn. And alive, he slashed deep, and the Night King stumbled back, hissing. Then something strange happened. The Night King looked not at Jon, but past him, at Robb. His mouth opened slightly, not in rage. Not in fear, recognition then. He vanished into the mist like smoke, and the dead stopped. They collapsed where they stood, thousands of bodies thudding to the ground. The silence was deafening. That night, the fires burned brighter than they had in days. The living buried their dead, and burned what could not be buried. The snow was red, but the walls still stood. Robb sat beside Jon, both of them wrapped in silence. "You saved me," Robb finally said. Jon shook his head. "We saved each other." But he looked at me like he knew me. Jon nodded slowly. "I saw it too." Robb's eyes narrowed. "Why would death remember my face?" Jon looked into the flames. "I don't know, but I don't think we've seen the last of him." The fires had burned all night. Winterfell smelled of smoke and ash, but the dead no longer walked its halls. The bodies were gone, burned or buried, and yet a different kind of cold now hung in the air, a silence that even victory couldn't erase. Robb Stark stood at the edge of the Godswood, staring at the old weirwood tree. Its red leaves whispered softly in the breeze, as if remembering something. Its carved face wept sap like blood. He wasn't alone. Bran Stark sat in his chair beneath the tree, eyes distant, eyes no longer just his own. He had arrived 2 days after the battle, brought south by Meera Reed and a few broken frostbitten companions. Robb had wept when he saw his brother alive. But the boy who returned from beyond the wall was no longer just Bran. He was the three-eyed raven, and now Robb had questions only he could answer. "Why did the Night King stop?" Robb asked. "He had me. One more strike and I was dead. Why did he vanish?" Bran didn't answer immediately. His eyes rolled white, and for a moment he was gone, traveling, seeing, remembering things that weren't his to begin with. When he returned, his voice was hollow. "Because he wasn't here to kill you," Bran said. "He was here to claim you." Robb stiffened. "What does that mean?" Bran's gaze met his, sharp and ancient. "There's something about your blood, about our family. The Starks have always been tied to the old magic. The First Men, the children of the forest, the wolves, the cold. The wall," Robb frowned. "You think the Night King knew me?" "Personally?" "No, but he knew what you are." The words made Robb's skin crawl. "And what am I?" Bran looked at the weirwood tree. "You're more than a king. Robb, you're a key." Later that night, Jon Snow found Robb alone in the crypts. He was standing before their father's tomb, the torchlight dancing across Ned Stark's stone face. Robb's hands were clenched into fists. "He looked at me like I belonged to him," Robb muttered. "Not like prey. Not like a threat, like I was his." Jon stood beside him, arms crossed. "Bran's right. There's something old in our blood. Maybe the Night King wants to turn that blood into something worse." Robb turned. "You think I could become one of them?" "I don't know," Jon said. "But if he couldn't kill you, maybe that's worse. Maybe he's waiting for something else." Robb turned back to his father's statue. "What would he have done?" he asked. Jon didn't hesitate. "Fought till his last breath. But never let fear make his choices." Robb nodded slowly. "Then we ride south." Jon blinked. "South? We just won. You want to march now?" "I don't have a choice," Robb said. "If I wait, the Night King might return with a power I don't understand. I need answers, and the only place that holds them is the Citadel. In Old Town, maesters whispered of unnatural storms in the north, of the fall of the wall, of whispers from frozen corpses. But the Archmaesters dismissed it all as superstition, until the Raven from Winterfell arrived. Robb Stark was coming, with Jon Snow, with Bran, with an army, not to fight, but to demand knowledge, and knowledge, they feared, was sometimes more dangerous than war. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea, another pair of eyes watched the north. Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of Nothing, breaker of no chains, sat in exile with what remained of her advisors. She had dragons, 2 now, but no throne, no allies, and no armies. But she had heard the tales, a king in the north who had risen from betrayal, who had united wildlings and lords alike, who had survived the Night King. Her mouth curled bitterly. "They'll kneel to a wolf," she whispered, "but not to a dragon." Tyrion Lannister, still by her side, poured himself another drink. "Maybe it's time dragons met wolves," he said carefully. "Before the dead come for all of us." Daenerys' eyes burned. "Let him come to me." Back at Winterfell, Bran slept beneath the godswood, his mind far away. He travelled beyond time, beyond memory, and what he saw made even him flinch. He saw a winter older than kingdoms. He saw a pact made in blood. Long before the wall was raised, he saw a Stark kneeling to a pale king of ice, not in defeat, but in agreement. A bargain, a secret oath, and then he saw that same pale king's blue eyes flick open again. The Night King had not vanished. He had remembered. The road to Old Town was long and cold, even in the south. But the cold no longer cared about maps. It followed Robb Stark like a shadow, nipping at his heels, whispering his name in every gust of wind. At his side rode Jon Snow, silent and watchful. Bran remained in a closed wagon, wrapped in furs, eyes rolling white more often than not. And behind them a strange army, wildlings, Northmen, a few brave Riverlanders. Tired but loyal, They weren't marching to war. They were marching for truth, and deep in the citadel, truth waited, chained, locked behind Meister superstition and fear. When Robb entered the hall of the conclave, the Archmeister stood like statues, grey-robed, arrogant and afraid. "You've brought war to a place of learning?" one of them hissed. "I've brought questions," Robb replied, voice calm but firm. "But if I don't get answers, war will come anyway, just not from me." He laid the Night King's broken spear on the table. I still clung to it, never melting. "This was forged before Valyria," Bran said from his seat, eyes distant. "When the children of the forest made him. Before the first men even built Winterfell." Another Meister stepped forward, lips trembling. "There is a book, forbidden, locked beneath the lower vaults. Older than anything else in the citadel." Jon leaned forward. "Then unlock it." The book was bound in blackened leather, older than kingdoms. Its pages were written in a language only Bran seemed to understand. What he read made the hall fall into silence. "There was a pact," he said slowly, "made in secret. The children of the forest. They created the Night King as a weapon, but he was too powerful. He turned on them. To stop him, the first men made a deal. They offered something, someone, to hold the balance. A bloodline that could walk both paths, of men and magic. A gatekeeper between life and death." His eyes lifted toward Robb. A Stark. Robb felt the weight of 1,000 winters fall on his shoulders. "You're telling me my blood is—" "What, a lock?" "No," Bran said. "You're the key." The truth shattered everything Robb thought he knew. He wasn't just the king in the north. He was a living link to an ancient oath. One that kept the Night King trapped but never truly destroyed. And now, with the north weakened by betrayal, war and pride, that balance had broken, and the Night King had returned to reclaim what was once offered. Him. A decision had to be made. Bran was clear. The Night King could not be defeated in battle, not for long. Not unless the original pact was honored. Or replaced. Jon argued for war. Tyrion, who had joined them in Old Town, begged for strategy. Even Daenerys, who had finally answered the call and landed at Dragonstone, proposed fire and fury, but Robb said nothing, not for days, not until the first reports arrived. The veil had fallen. Winter was coming fast now. One night, Robb sat alone in the crypts beneath Old Town's holdfast. The maesters had brought down the Stark records, scrolls, bones, blades rusted with time. He sat in front of one name in particular, Brandon Stark, called the Builder, founder of Winterfell, creator of the Wall, the one who made the oath. Robb looked at his name. And then he whispered, "I understand now. You didn't build it to keep the dead out. You built it to keep us in." At dawn, Robb climbed to the highest tower of the High Tower. The cold had reached even here. Frost touched the windows. The sky was heavy with unnatural snow. Jon stood beside him. "You're going to go to him, aren't you?" Robb nodded. "And if it's a trap, then I die." "But if I don't, we all do." Jon looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped forward and hugged his brother one last time. "You are the best of us, Robb. You always were." Robb smiled, tired. "Then remember me as I am, not as what I may become." In the heart of the haunted forest, Robb rode alone. He followed no map. Just a pull, a feeling in his bones, and there, beneath the shattered remains of a heart tree, surrounded by swirling winds and unnatural cold, the Night King waited. He did not speak. He only watched. Robb stepped forward. "I know what you want," he said. "You came to claim a promise." The Night King raised his hand, not in attack but in acknowledgement. Robb closed his eyes. "I give it freely." And then silence. Across Westeros the winds stopped, the dead fell. The cold retreated. The snow melted from castle stones. The Night King was gone, and so was Robb Stark. Back in Winterfell, Jon stood alone in the Godswood. Bran wheeled up beside him. "It's over," Jon said quietly. Bran shook his head. "No, it's only changed." Jon turned. "What do you mean?" "He didn't die," Bran whispered. "He became something else." Jon frowned. Bran looked toward the north. "He became the Wall.